Welcome back to The Report. Now, for a final segment this evening, we've got a special feature with Dr Jamal Badawi, the prominent cleric who was recently in this country. Reporter Yasmin Khatun went to speak to him.
Dr Badawi, you spoke about human equality and the way in which we deal with others from different communities in your khutbah earlier today. How would we apply this if you were to very briefly sum that up in terms of our interaction in the West with other communities that we live with?
Okay, the key ayah in the Quran, and first of all I'd like to say thank you to you and to the Islam channel for having me, and also my dua and respect to all the your audience and viewers. As far as the application, it is based on really what the Quran teaches us. It should be normal relationship, like our relationship with our Muslim brothers and sisters, on the same plane when we talk about equality. If I respect my Muslim brother or sister, I have to respect also people of other communities, whether they are believers even in Allah or not, so long as they are coexisting peacefully and justly with us. So modern term would not really change the principle, but perhaps you have to look for other forms of, you might say, application of the same principle. The same apply with my sports team. You see, the Quran provided such a broad level of guidance that you can apply it in any situation.
We see a lot of brandishing around ideas of political Islam. What exactly does that mean, and what role does political Islam play in the modern sphere?
The reality from the Quran and Sunnah, ادخلوا في السلم كافة, that we enter into Islam wholeheartedly and fully, which means it is a comprehensive, complete way of living. We find references to that in the Quran. We find in the life of the Prophet ﷺ and his sayings as well, awareness of having some identity, a political identity in that sense. So there's nothing, what is politics? Many people think of politics in the negative sense. People who are just after possession, even though they exploit all kinds of forms of fear-mongering and hate-mongering, even just to get votes. But political life actually is, in its origin, is running society. It is a public service if a person really is sincere and implement those teaching. So we cannot separate public life from private life for the Muslim. And also, to practice Islam fully, if you don't get the supporting political system that gives everybody the rights, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, then of course you have a great difficulty. I object also to the political Islam or politicization of Islam, which means actually clip Islam to according to your own hawa or demand, contrary to its nature, is that oftentimes the term political Islam seem to be used in many negative situations that has nothing to do with Islam really in its reality. When people say, for example, the so-called Islamic State, it is neither Islamic, neither state, by the way, in my view, and I can defend that. And there has been a letter already written by a number of international scholars rebutting, trying to base their argument or their evil deeds on the Quran and Sunnah, which is a huge distortion. I hope I'll be addressing some of that this evening. And that would give a bad image that political Islam means also violence. That's not part of Islam. So I'm for using Islam as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger and the vast majority of scholars throughout history used it. It is one aspect of the life of the believer. There is nothing called Islam that doesn't deal with public life or running the state. How do you get a state run?
I asked Dr Badawi what forms of protest he thought Muslims should take on when taking a stand against governing bodies according to the Quran and Sunnah.
Islam requires sacrifice in a peaceful manner. There are only rare cases where people are allowed, according to jurists, to carry arms to oppose the other rulers, provided they tried all possible, reasonable, peaceful means. When people keep on calling, even in that case, we find that some groups of Muslims even have taken all of these losses and brutalities against them and continued to insist on the peaceful resistance. And I think in our age, The dictators have all kind of means of intelligence, not intelligence in mind, intelligence, spying and all of that information. They have all kind of military and oppressive police power and all of that. And if you try to resist by using the force of arm prematurely, in fact, you might be drifting into civil war where the damages and losses would far exceed. I'm not saying in all situations. In many cases, the damage and losses exceed benefits that could be achieved from that. So it's a matter of people who are knowledgeable of Sharia and knowledgeable of running states also to keep discussing that matter and weigh the harms and benefits.
If I could just very briefly ask you on that particular note, for example, we see in situations like we have done in Syria, how would we apply that to that?
Well, Syria, like I said earlier, of course, the situation might be different. I'm not defending that, but maybe the people in Syria were more aware of their situation, and the amount of brutality and killing, even of children, and torturing of children was unabated, and also the militia, just like the Baltaghiya in Egypt, the Shabiha in Syria, were wreaking havoc on people. It is possible, I'm saying it is possible, I don't know, I wasn't party to that they determined that in their case, if they continue the peaceful resistance, there would be more and more people killed. And we hear about barrels of explosive barrels deliberately dropped on heavily populated area. We hear about the use of all forbidden chemical and gas type of war, poisonous gas. And the world is watching on that. And people in power say, oh, this is the red line, but they pass the red line and keep on as if the lives of more than at least 250,000, some estimated more, it means nothing. So in a case like that, maybe they determined that even though it might be close to civil war, in their case, there is no other viable alternative.
Can you tell me about forms of warfare according to the Quran and Sunnah?
That has been set very clearly in the Quran and in the teaching Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's amazing. It's nothing new really, except maybe the means of warfare these days. Number one, to summarize succinctly. One, pre-battle, the basic teaching is to try your best to solve things, achieving both peace and justice at the same time. Then number one, to avoid, and that was the action of the Prophet ﷺ. He did not really push for a battlefield unless there was no other alternative to repel aggression. Number two, before going to the battlefield, make sure that it meets the requirement in the Quran, which I found from my humble study, only one of two reasons: to fight those who initiate aggression against Muslims, or to resist oppression, not any small oppression, severe oppression, as the Quran alludes to the people driven from their homes. You find this in the verse quoted from Surah Al-Mumtahana, the 60th Surah, Ayah 8. You find it also mentioned in Surah 2, Surah Al-Baqarah, from 190 to 194. These are the two. I didn't find a third one just to carry arm and fight people, because there is no such thing. There is nothing called holy war. War is not holy. This is oxymoron, and cannot be accepted. So make sure that it meets those requirements, that it could not be resolved peacefully without carrying arm, like somebody is attacking you. What do you do? Sitting like they say, a sitting duck, then you have to check that. But during the battle, even before the battle begins, when the armies are just then the Prophet ﷺ told that make a final appeal to the aggressive enemy to come to terms on a peaceful way, so that peace is still even as you get ready for fight. Then there is the behavior during the battlefield itself. And the Prophet ﷺ said something that I dare say that the Geneva Conventions and other international humanitarian laws of war did not add much to. First of all, to spare what we call today non-combatants. He spoke specifically about women who are not fighting, children, old people, monks, even of other religions, Christian monks and others who are not carrying arms. Even asif, which is mentioned also meaning somebody who's being hired to do work, even though he could be a young man and capable of fighting, but he's not carrying arms, he's farming or doing something else. What could be more than that? You don't loot, you don't destroy. Sensitivity has been to the point that even you cannot cut trees, fruitful trees, not old ones that you can use for wood firewood. You cannot cut fruitful tree if there is no strategic reason. This has been rarely used. But you don't cut trees or destroy. You don't destroy what we call in modern terms the infrastructure of the country, like poisoning wells and damaging the land through the use of chemicals and bombardment that destroy agriculture, because a lot of innocent people will be hurt by that. You don't mistreat the prisoners of war or torture them. In fact, there are instances in the early period where some of the prisoners embraced Islam for one reason. They noted that their Muslim captors are giving them the better food and keeping the tougher food or the more common food for themselves. You don't mutilate the body. Worst, burning a human body after even they died in the battlefield. No mutilation. Let them be buried in dignity as humans. I said, with all the crime they did, at least an aspect of human dignity. You don't throw them, you don't burn them, you don't mutilate them in the horrible way that we hear about, or beheading them. Or these are all, it's brutality that's unheard of even among the early deviant Kharijites in the early days of Islam. And then during the war also, in the battle, as the Quran says in Surah 9, if one of the mushrikeen, the idolatrous Arabs, meaning who were fighting, استغاثك وإن أحد المشركين استجارك فأجره, which means if one of those even fighters who are fighting you just remove his arm and he said, I seek refuge in you, it says give him refuge. Why? حتى يسمع كلام الله, so that he hears the word of Allah, because maybe the propaganda machinery in that time, that's like the propaganda machinery of many big media outlets today. Maybe he's affected by that propaganda, but if he listened to the word of Allah, maybe his heart would be softened. Not necessarily becoming Muslim, at least to be neutralized. That's fine. Not only this, in Surah Al-Anfal, the 8th surah that deal with lots of aspects of warfare, it even say, referring to the actual battlefield, that وَإِن جَنَحُوا لِلسَّلْمِ فَاجْنَحْ لَهَا وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. If the enemy is inclined to a peaceful settlement, you should also be, even though you might be afraid or worried about their betrayal. That's an amazing indication that I summarize in saying that we're not interested as Muslims, if we really understand our deen, in cutting as many heads as possible, but saving as many souls as possible with the minimum, which is a qaida, rule in Sharia. You do things with the minimum harm, with the greater benefit also, and the greatest benefit comes from peace. And then post-battlefield, it opened the door even for reconciliation. One of the ayahs was cited in the khutbah, that it may be that Allah will place mawaddah, love and affection between your hearts and those who were your enemies. It didn't say provided they accept Islam. I mean, that could be one means. But even then, reconciliation should be sought to try and prevent. And then one unique thing, that Islam accepted the Arab practice of barring war for 1/3 of the year, the 4 sacred months. So for 4 months that the Arabs used not to fight, that has also been accepted in Islam, unless of course they attack you, that you have to defend yourself, which is very interesting. 1/3 of every year. Look at what's happening in the last few years. Every single day, people are being killed right and left.
Dr Jamal Badawi is an acclaimed author, activist and speaker on Islam, and former professor at a number of schools. Vice chairman of the Islamic University, he is also an expert in Christian-Muslim dialogue. Dr Badawi has lectured throughout the world.
Well, OK, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on this episode of The Report. I want to thank my guests on today's programme and to thank you at home for tuning in. You can keep up with us on Twitter by following @IslamChannel and by using the hashtag The Report. But for now, we'll leave you with scenes dating back exactly 5 years today, when an explosion on an offshore oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico killed 11 workers and started a devastating environmental disaster. The Deepwater Horizon oil rig caused 200 million gallons of black crude oil to spew into the ocean for almost 3 months after it exploded. The spill hit hundreds of miles of coastline, killing thousands of animals. In 2013, it was reported that dolphins and other marine life continued to die in record numbers, with infant dolphins dying at 6 times the normal rate. 5 years on, oil continues to be found. Until tomorrow, good night.